A lost daughter thrust into the glittering halls of power, Emma Reed's heart pounds when she discovers her own childhood portrait hidden in a millionaire's mansion. Betrayed by the man she called father, she risks everything, facing death threats, unraveling forged deaths, and exposing a web of deceit to reclaim her name and her mother's legacy. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of secrets, revenge, and triumph as Emma transforms her pain into a force for justice. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to hear Emma's full, jaw-dropping story. Emma Reed balanced a tray of crystal champagne flutes as she navigated the extravagant ballroom atop a Manhattan penthouse. At 23, she prided herself on flawless service, the crisp, starched lines of her uniform mirroring her steady resolve. Yet tonight, something prickled at her senses as she moved among impeccably dressed guests. Earlier, her roommate Zoe Martinez had teased that Emma could etch her name into the society pages if she simply smiled at the right patrons. But Emma offered only a polite curve of her lips. She believed her life's certainty lay in routine, clear tasks, measured steps, unwavering poise. As she refilled a guest's glass, she noticed a richly carved doorway at the far end of a side corridor, the entrance to Victor Langford's private study. Intrigue and a jolt of recognition tugged at her, reminding her of stories she had heard but never believed. With a careful breath, Emma slipped away from the swirling crowd, her heels clicking over polished marble like a metronome counting down to destiny. She paused just outside the door, where the soft glow of an ornate sconce illuminated a portrait she would carry in her mind forever. In a gilded frame hung the image of a 4-year-old girl whose unruly curls were tied with a ribbon, her eyes wide with innocent wonder and her cheeks flushed in a shy smile. Emma's breath hitched. This was her. The same puckered lips she had seen in early photographs, the same pale pink dress trimmed in delicate lace. Her heart thundered as she leaned closer, reading the inscription etched into the frame's edge. "My cherished daughter, forever in my heart." A flood of disjointed memories washed over her. The warmth of a mother's embrace, the distant melody of a lullaby, and then the sudden emptiness that followed. Her hands trembled, sending a single champagne flute skittering on its base. She reached out to steady it, fingers brushing cool crystal, as questions swarmed her thoughts. How had this portrait come to hang in the home of Victor Langford, the celebrated philanthropist she had watched moments earlier as he mingled among millionaires? Why would he display her childhood like a hidden trophy? Before she could gather her wits, a harsh voice cut through the silence. Employees aren't allowed in private wings. A burly security guard loomed in the doorway, his uniform crisp, his expression immovable. Emma's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I apologize," she whispered, voice steady despite the quake in her chest. "I must have taken a wrong turn." She offered a curt nod and retreated, each step measured to conceal the storm inside her. In the hallway's gilded half-light, she paused to collect herself, but the image of the portrait glowed behind her closed eyelids. Back in the radiant ballroom, the hum of conversation and the clink of glass replaced the hush she had left behind. Emma resumed her service with mechanical precision, pouring champagne and exchanging polished pleasantries, yet her mind remained ensnared by that impossible portrait. Every detail was etched into her memory, the sweep of the ribbon, the curve of the frame, the warmth that radiated from the image. She pressed her palm to her chest, willing her racing heartbeat to slow as a singular resolve crystallized within her. Tonight marked more than a routine shift. It was the beginning of a journey to reclaim what had been stolen. With every guest she served, Emma silently rehearsed the promise she would carry forward. "I will uncover the truth behind that gilded frame. I will learn why my past was hidden away in the most secure corridor of this mansion. And I will not rest until I reclaim the childhood that was taken from me." As the gala's laughter swelled once more, Emma felt the familiar cloak of routine give way to a fierce determination, and she knew her life would never be the same again. That night, Emma sank into a worn leather armchair at the back corner of a dimly lit cafe, its walls plastered with sepia-toned photographs of long-forgotten jazz greats. She cradled a paper cup of coffee, its steam twisting upward as she booted up a rented laptop. determined to piece together the fragments of her life. With trembling fingers hovering over the keyboard, she searched news archives, corporate press releases, and social media chatter about Victor Langford's past. By the pale glow of the screen, she learned that Victor's first wife, Charlotte, had died in a car crash 2 decades ago, and that the couple had a daughter, presumed lost in the same tragedy. Yet every mention of a child vanished from public record, replaced by glowing reports of Victor's philanthropy. Intrigue ignited behind Emma's eyes. She recalled her own vague memories. A lullaby sung by a mother she could barely remember, a crimson ribbon in her curls that matched the dress in the fading photograph she glimpsed at the penthouse. Determined to dig deeper, she recalled a name whispered among the catering staff at the gala: Samuel Blake, the veteran bartender whose flair for mixing cocktails was matched only by his ear for scandal. The next morning, Emma slipped Samuel a discreet note folded between her resume and a generous tip, requesting a private chat at the cafe where he began his shift, long before the glittering crowds arrived. Samuel arrived in a rumpled suit, eyes wary but curious when Emma slid into the seat opposite him. The cafe's jazz playlist hummed in the background, a soft accompaniment to their hushed conversation. Pulling a faded photograph from her pocket, an orchestrated snapshot of the Langford wedding, she asked him to confirm the story of Victor's missing daughter. Samuel's face, lined by years of late nights and tough secrets, hardened as he took a long sip of his black coffee before leaning in. "Kid, you don't want to mess with that man's secrets," he murmured. He declared the girl dead and collected $500,000 in insurance. His heart was so cold, he even kept a portrait of her locked away, like a trophy. Emma pressed on, her tone gentle but insistent. "Why would he erase me?" she asked, voice barely audible. Samuel's gaze flicked toward the door before he sighed. "Money and reputation, darling. If Charlotte had survived and the daughter was alive, he'd have to answer inconvenient questions about who she was and why she disappeared. The less people knew, the cleaner his record." Her hands balled into fists, the betrayal stinging but fueling her resolve. She slid a crisp $20 bill across the table, a token of gratitude for the confirmation she needed. Samuel accepted it, then added, "You should find a private investigator, someone fearless. Try Lillian Grant." That evening, Emma drafted a terse email to Lillian, introducing herself as someone determined to uncover the truth. She attached the photograph she'd taken in the penthouse, the little girl's shy smile now transformed into a call to action. As she clicked send, she traced the edges of the photo, the child's gaze anchoring her purpose. Zoe's words echoed in her mind, "Truth is your greatest ally," and Emma allowed herself a rare, hopeful smile. It was time to assemble her team of unexpected allies and confront the forces that stole her history, reclaiming her identity. Emma Reed sat at a small wooden table in Lillian Grant's dimly lit brownstone office, the scent of old books and stale coffee hanging heavy in the air. It was the second evening since she had slipped the photograph of the 4-year-old girl, her own childhood likeness, across Samuel Blake's bar counter, begging for confirmation that Victor Langford had declared his daughter dead and collected $500,000 in insurance. Now, facing Lillian, Emma felt both relief and trepidation. The veteran investigator studied the image with sharp gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her lined face unreadable in the flicker of a single desk lamp. "This is compelling," Lillian finally said, setting the photograph beside an open ledger filled with yellowing pages. "But it's just the first clue." She leaned back and steepled her fingers. "If you're serious, Emma, we need to move carefully and build a team." Emma nodded, heart pounding in her chest. Over the next 72 hours, she and Lillian formed an unlikely partnership, one fueled by Emma's youthful determination, the other guided by Lillian's decades of casework. Emma spent her afternoons filing discreet requests at the county clerk's office for sealed birth certificates and hospital records, while Lillian dug through private databases and dusty microfilm archives. Each document that arrived bore blacked-out names and cryptic judicial stamps, but together they spotted Emma's birth name, Isabella Langford, typed neatly in a foster care report from 20 years ago. The moment Emma read those words, her pulse thundered in her ears. Proof that she had been born into Victor's world, only to vanish from it. Yet every step forward, invited a shadow of danger. One morning, Emma found her apartment door ajar, the lock twisted as if forced. A single black glove lay on the threshold, an unspoken warning. She froze, adrenaline surging, before snapping the glove into a plastic bag and calling Lillian. Through the crackle of the phone line, Lillian's voice was steady but firm. "They know you're poking around. Stay vigilant and trust no one outside our circle." That night, Emma enlisted her roommate Zoe Martinez, whose tech skills proved invaluable. Together they installed encrypted messaging apps on Emma's phone, masked her IP address behind multiple VPNs, and set up alerts for any searches related to her real name. Cozy laughter over late-night pizza briefly lifted the tension, but it also reminded Emma why she could not give up. Meanwhile, Lillian turned her attention to New Beginnings, a private adoption agency that had shuttered in 2001 under mysterious circumstances. In the brittle pages of a forgotten ledger, she discovered that its founder, Douglas Mercer, dissolved the operation without explanation shortly after finalizing Isabella's adoption paperwork. Mercer's personal journal, found in a lockbox in his abandoned office, described an unwanted burden and an arrangement made to protect all of us. Reading those lines, Emma felt her blood run cold. Evidence that Victor had not only erased her legally, but had also silenced anyone who might expose him. Undeterred, Emma pored over Mercer's journal entries alongside foster care board minutes and a redacted insurance payout schedule. She traced Victor's frantic efforts to secure prenuptial agreements for each subsequent marriage, ensuring that no spouse could contest the false death certificates. The puzzle fit together like a damning mosaic. Victor engineered his image as a grieving widower and charitable patriarch, all while hiding the truth of his daughter's fate. Each revelation steeled Emma's resolve. Each shred of paperwork was a weapon in her quest for justice. Late nights found Emma rereading every file, her mind racing with questions and strategies. Fear still surfaced in sharp pangs, the echo of footsteps in the hallway, a car idling too long outside her building, but it only deepened her determination. In Lillian's office, surrounded by stacks of documents and the soft hum of a ticking clock, Emma realized that she had built her own arsenal of truth. Allies like Lillian and Zoe stood by her, unwavering. And as the evidence mounted, she knew the final confrontation with Victor Langford was no longer a distant hope. It was an inevitable reckoning. With her identity reclaimed piece by piece, Emma prepared to face her adversary, armed not with anger alone, but with the unassailable power of irrefutable proof. At the Langford Foundation's annual Black Tie Gala, the grand ballroom shimmered beneath the glow of glittering chandeliers, and Victor Langford stood at the podium in a flawless tuxedo, his voice resonating through the crowd as he wove a poignant tale of personal tragedy and charitable purpose. Emma Reed circulated the room on silent feet, each measured step betraying nothing of the fire that burned within her. Moments earlier, she had slipped backstage into the hushed service corridors where Lillian Grant had pressed a thick dossier into her trembling hands. Fake death certificates, hospital records redacted to conceal inconvenient truths, and insurance payout ledgers showing that Victor had collected a fortune the moment his wife and daughter were presumed dead. Now, with the dossier secured inside her apron pocket and recording devices discreetly tucked away, Emma was ready to execute the plan they had painstakingly crafted. She paused by a polished marble column as Victor reached the climactic crescendo of his speech, arms outstretched in an imploring gesture that had been practiced 1,000 times under the unforgiving gaze of closed-circuit cameras. The audience erupted in polite applause, their admiration as rehearsed as the billionaire's charismatic smile, but Emma could barely hear their accolades over the drumbeat of her pulse. With Zoe Martinez's encrypted microphone hidden beneath her uniform, Emma inhaled deeply to steady her resolve. As Victor concluded, "It is through our shared grief that we extend hope to those who have none." The applause swelled once more, and the gallery lights brightened. Taking advantage of the momentary glare, Emma slipped behind the podium, her hands steady as she reached for the cluster of microphones. The sudden hush that fell over the room was like a wave crashing upon stunned shores. Victor's expression flickered from surprise to irritation as she straightened and smiled with a calm authority that belied her inner storm. "Excuse me, Mr. Langford," she began, her voice clear enough that every listener leaned forward. "Thank you for sharing your story of loss, but there are questions that demand answers." A ripple of uneasy murmur spread through the audience as Emma produced the first document, a photocopy of the forged death certificate declaring Isabella Langford dead on the day of Charlotte Langford's fatal accident. When she held it aloft, the hush deepened into shocked silence. Victor's veneer of confidence cracked. He stepped forward, gloved hand reaching for the microphone. "Miss," he began, but Emma cut him off, lifting a second sheet. "The insurance payout receipt, totaling over $500,000. Your generosity is remarkable, Victor. But did you ever consider where these funds came from?" she asked, voice steady as she laid out each piece of evidence. The sealed hospital memo indicating Charlotte lingered alive for hours after the crash, the adoption agency files marking her daughter's disappearance, the notarized guardianship forms that legally erased Isabella's existence. The gallery's ornate mirrors reflected the stunned faces of society's elite, their whispered disbelief echoing off gilded walls. Cameras flashed like lightning storms as reporters realized they were gathering the story of the century. Victor's eyes narrowed as he realized the trap. His daughter, thought long buried, had risen on the stage he had so carefully orchestrated. "This is slander," he hissed, attempting to reclaim control as he lunged for the microphone. But Emma stepped back, raising her voice to fill the cavernous room. "I have already forwarded every document, every email exchange, and even recorded admissions from your own attorney to the media and the authorities 5 minutes ago." She paused while a large screen behind Victor flickered to life, projecting the same childhood photograph he had proudly displayed in his private study, now labeled, "To my cherished daughter, forever in my heart." The inscription was unmistakable, the handwriting unmistakably his. A collective gasp swept the room, metal cutlery clattering against china as the audience recoiled. Victor's face drained of color, his composure unraveling before a live audience that only minutes ago revered him as a paragon of virtue. Emma's heart pounded fiercely, but her voice remained composed. 20 years ago, you turned my mother's death and my supposed demise into a commodity, all in the name of philanthropy. Tonight, I reclaim my name, my story, and the truth." With that, security guards approached Victor and led him off the stage as he stammered denials. Emma stepped down to the roar of camera shutters and the distant wail of sirens, the culmination of justice closing in. As she descended the steps, Lillian and Zoe met her with triumphant smiles. In the chaos that followed, Emma knew that nothing would ever be the same, and that the legacy she would build from this moment forward would shine far brighter than any chandelier-lit deception. Within days of the dramatic gala revelation, federal agents descended upon Victor Langford's penthouse suite and corporate offices, executing search warrants and charging him with insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and complicity in Charlotte's murder. Emma watched the live news coverage, barely daring to breathe, as uniformed officers handcuffed the man who had tried to erase her entire existence. As he was led away, cameras captured the stunned faces of former supporters, their applause replaced by hisses of betrayal. The media frenzy that followed stripped away the final veneer of his carefully constructed reputation. Articles chronicled the millions he had siphoned from charities into secret accounts, the falsified documents he had used to declare his daughter dead, and the harrowing testimony of those who survived his manipulations. Rather than bask in personal vindication, Emma channeled her energy into transforming the very foundation that had once symbolized her father's hypocrisy. With Lillian and Zoe by her side, she launched the Charlotte Langford Memorial Trust, pledging total transparency in all donations and a mission to support orphans, children aging out of foster care, and families fractured by loss. The first major initiative was the groundbreaking of a community center in the Bronx, where safe housing, educational workshops, and mental health counseling would be offered free of charge. Aunt Claire Danvers, Charlotte's younger sister, driven by hope and grief, embraced Emma in a heartfelt reunion that healed years of absence. As Emma explained plans to honor her mother's legacy, Claire's eyes brimmed with tears of pride. Soon, journalists and philanthropists gathered at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, where Emma spoke with quiet conviction about turning tragedy into purpose. Letters began to pour in. A teenager who had been living on the streets wrote of receiving his first scholarship. A single mother in Ohio described how the trust's microgrants had kept her family together. And dozens of children sent drawings and thank you notes that lined the new center's walls like a mosaic of second chances. National magazines featured Emma on their covers, not as the daughter who destroyed a fortune, but as a visionary leader who redefined what true generosity means. Award ceremonies honored her for courage and compassion, but she always dedicated those accolades to Charlotte's dream of fair adoption practices and child advocacy. At night, Emma retreated to her modest office overlooking the city skyline, sorting through care packages and letters that reminded her of what truly mattered. The stolen years of her childhood had been reclaimed, not through vengeance alone, but through a legacy of hope that illuminated the lives of countless vulnerable souls. While Victor languished behind bars, stripped of wealth and status, Emma rose brighter with each sunrise, determined that no child would ever be written out of their own story again. In a final tribute, she arranged for the publication of Charlotte's journals, exposing her investigative work on corrupt adoption agencies and ensuring her mother's voice would guide reform for generations. As the first copies rolled off the press, Emma held a clean sheet of paper and whispered, "This is our tomorrow." The truth she had unearthed had planted seeds that would blossom into a forest of compassion far larger than any empire built on lies. In the months that followed, criminal investigations extended beyond Victor himself to the corrupt networks he had cultivated. Federal prosecutors announced the closure of 7 illegal adoption rings, rescued 22 children, and filed charges against several officials. Emma collaborated closely with investigative journalists to ensure that no stone remained unturned, granting interviews that combined steely resolve with heartfelt empathy. Her vision expanded to include scholarships for graduate studies and a mobile counseling unit that traveled to remote boroughs. When Emma accepted the National Humanitarian Award, she dedicated the honor to every child who had been written off by the system. She closed Charlotte's journals each evening with gratitude for the truth setting them free. In the end, Emma's journey shows us that truth has a power far greater than any lie built on fear or greed. Her unwavering determination to uncover her past, even when threats and intimidation tried to silence her, reminds us that our identities are worth fighting for. Justice isn't something that arrives on its own. It's forged by those brave enough to face uncomfortable realities and demand accountability. Emma turned her pain into purpose, reclaiming both her name and her mother's legacy by transforming a foundation of deceit into one of genuine compassion. Her story teaches us that redemption is possible, not through vengeance alone, but through rebuilding what was broken, offering hope, support, and love to those who need it most. When we choose integrity over convenience and empathy over indifference, we become architects of a better world. So tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us on Echoes of a Forgotten Legacy for more stories that prove sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest wounds. Stay with us. You never know which truth will inspire your next triumph.